Great. Good evening, everyone. And this is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. Today is February 18th, 2025. A warm welcome to everyone who could make it out on this frigid evening, even though we're doing virtually. Thank goodness we don't have to be trudging out there outside tonight. On tonight's agenda, as you know, we've been going through the capital needs inventory of the city. We previously discussed it overall. We also went through the Parks Department last week. Tonight, we're going to be talking about streets and bridges, as well as ADA accessibility. And we do have a presentation this evening from members of the Board of Public Service. I know you know Rich Bradley, who's president of the Board of Public Service, and he's brought along his capable engineer, John Kohler, to present on streets and bridges. So why don't we get into that presentation, and then we'll just proceed with questions from there, and we'll play it by ear after that. So Rich, I'll give it to you, and you can take it away.
Yeah, I'm not going to say a whole lot more than that. John Kohler will introduce himself. John's a long-term city engineer. He's my chief of planning, and he's a registered professional engineer. So, John, with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you carry it away with all the details.
Thank you, Rich, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone, for the Citizens Advisory Committee. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that? All right, great. So Rich mentioned I've been a long-time employee. Actually, I just passed my 21-year mark. And one of the major functions that I do for the Board of Public Service in the Planning Division is apply for federal funding for transportation-related projects. I just tallied up projects that I've been engaged in those 21 years. And so far, we've submitted 81 projects totaling over $420 million that we've got for the city. And usually that's about an 80% federal, 20% local match. So a lot of the projects that I'll present to you tonight involve those 1/5% local match, and those are the monies that I'm typically will be presenting for consideration to the Capital Committee.
Yeah, and just a reminder, we are working on, and John is had worked off this the inventory with streets and bridges. So those items that were identified on that total inventory are the ones that John is going to be going over this evening.
Great. And I've got 3 roadway projects to present, 2 traffic signal related projects, 1 bridge, and then you mentioned ADA, and then there's also a request for some bike facility upgrades and maintenance remarking initiative that I'll talk about as well. So the first major project involves, let me touch a little bit on the funding sources. East-West Gateway Council of Governments is the region's municipal planning organization that is the administrator of all these federal grants that the city and these counties in Missouri and Illinois compete for. It is a very competitive process. There are predominantly 4 funding sources that are competed against. The most general is the Surface Transportation Program, and that covers about any type of improvement within publicly owned property on transportation, federally classified routes. There's also CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, and usually these are signal related or bike ped type projects. The goal of that funding is to remove emissions, improve air quality. And then another funding source is Transportation Alternative Program. That's usually bike ped related, much smaller pot of funding. And then lastly, there's a bridge category that involves on-system federal aid routes and then more local road bridges. This first project that I've shown here is a major regionally significant project that the city has undertaken. It actually started with discussions when the NGA successfully won the bid to relocate from South City to North City. We made two major promises with that relocation. One was a north-south route on Jefferson. We were able to secure multiple sources of federal funding. And if you've been on Jefferson lately, north of I-64, all the way to Natural Bridge, that whole corridor has been reconstructed and runs right by the new NGA facility. That was one fulfilled commitment. The second one involves Cass Avenue. That's what you see in the blue line here. That runs east-west. It essentially connects the highway system at Highway 70, 44, and runs west through the NGA at Jefferson, and we tie all the way to Grand Avenue, which happens to be the Brick Line Greenway. That's a significant investment for the region. We've connected to that major multi-use trail of GRG. That blue line also crosses through another major bike cycle track project on 20th Street, right in the middle. And then it also will eventually tie into, through a shared type facility, the Mississippi River Greenway along the riverfront. So to get into the finances here, this is a project that's been spearheaded by SLDC. They've seeded a lot of the initial funding for design and right-of-way. The total project's about 24 million, 13 million federal, and we already secured a $5 million congressional earmark for the project. Last year, this committee approved 3.8 million for the local match. This year, we are requesting an additional 1.2 million, which should fulfill our commitment, coupled with SLDC's 1.3 million. The project is about 35% complete with design, since that's being funded outside of federal funding. We're trying to pursue and have a shovel-ready project. We did just submit this under the Surface Transportation to East-West Gateway on February 7th of this year. And we should have a good idea come May of this year whether or not East-West Gateway will make a recommendation for funding. But we are, as a city, guaranteed to get one surface transportation project, and this is the one that we submitted. So we are in very good shape to receive this balance of funding of 12.7 million for regional significance. So it's essentially 2 miles of roadway. We're reducing lanes from 4 to 2 lanes, one in each direction, with the center median and turn lanes at intersections. We're building a 10-foot wide multi-use trail all along the north side that will intersect those major bike initiatives that I mentioned. We're building all new sidewalk. It'll be fully accessible pathway, ADA compliant corridor. Building new signals, raising 4 intersections along the project, landscaping, new curb, and then we've worked very closely with Bi-State to upgrade transit facilities and stops all along the route, optimize locations. And of course, this project will cross the green line on Jefferson at Cass. So a lot of transit connectivity as well. And I'll go ahead and go through all these projects and then open it up for questions at the end. Next major project that we submitted last year was the river to pier improvements. This runs from Lansdowne to Gravois. This is another major STPS project. We used the one project opportunity. We're guaranteed to get it, and we did. $20 million. This was a federal ask of $16 million. And we're just now selecting the consultant, should start design shortly. And because it's federal funding, East-West Gateway dictates when funding's available for each phase, design phase, right away, and then construction. And they span that out over several years. That's why you see anticipated construction in 2028. But this piece of River to Pear, I'm sure most of you have driven it. It's very narrow lanes. It's curvy. We've got problems with failing infrastructure, the curves falling apart, what's left of it. We've got transit problems where we don't have connectivity across the street. Transit riders get dropped off, and then there's no safe way for them to cross back to their origin. We are looking at widening the roadway, building new drainage, resurfacing, and then many traffic calming features. And I'll talk a little bit about a raised concrete median to keep people from crossing over. We've got some acceleration, deceleration lanes. That's what you see in the upper left. This is that Chippewa overpass area. We've got new guardrail at our curved areas. We're going to apply a high friction pavement surface, better signage, chevrons to warn drivers of upcoming turns in the roadway. As many of you know, there's a traffic stop sign at Loughborough right in the middle of this arterial. That's somewhat of a dangerous high crash spot. People aren't expecting crashes. So we are looking at building a new traffic signal to replace that stop sign, which is more indicative of that type of principal arterial. Putting some nice trees in, all new lighting, and I mentioned curving. The next couple projects are more the congestion mitigation, air quality, fairly straightforward. We are interconnecting all these signals along this project to South Broadway from Marceau to Carroll Street. It's 6.1 miles, but we are upgrading all the traffic signal equipment and then tying the fiber back into our real-time management center, where we'll be able to monitor and adjust traffic flow as necessary. This project, we did get funding last year, and the committee secured $240,000 for the design, which will be starting soon in the next month or so. And we are requesting funding for right-of-way and construction, which is the match of 1.86 million compared to the 8.4 million that the federal funding is providing for the project. So there's 21 traffic signals in this corridor. And then as part of that, we are upgrading all the curb ramps at all those intersections to be compliant with American with Disabilities Act. Very similar to South Broadway is the North Broadway. Phase 8, traffic management enhancements. This runs from Cass to Riverview. It's a little less dollar value, total cost $7 million, $5.6 million federal. Same situation, we got the design match, we're selecting consultant ready to start design, but we need another 1.24 million for right-of-way and construction. It's 6.8 miles of fiber interconnection, but only 13 traffic signals. Even though it's longer in length, there's less infrastructure to upgrade, but all tied into the real-time management center, all new ADA improvements at those 13 intersections. This is one of the TAP funded projects. It's transportation alternative, and it involves Christie Boulevard. This is an extension of Great Rivers Greenway at Christie that ends at Holly Hills in Christie Boulevard. We are proposing to extend that about 1 mile all along Christie on the east side of Christie up to the newly, or what will be a newly constructed full signalized intersection at Neosho, as funded through the ARPA projects that's now underway. My understanding, they're going to start that intersection in the next few weeks. But this is a very similar to all GRG major multi-use trails. It will be a raised path, completely separated from traffic, and it will have some improvements at Gravois. We'll get rid of that slip lane that encourages high speed. We'll redo that intersection by working with MoDOT, and then we'll build a new signal at that five-legged Eichelberger intersection, and then ADA improvements all along the route. And that one is a project we just submitted in February. We'll know in May if East West Gateway is recommending it, but this is the only one we're submitting, and we believe that we will get secure funding for this project. 620,000 is what we're asking the capital committee to allocate. Next project is the traffic management enhancement phase 9, similar to 7 and 8, but includes the area on the west side of the city, all along McCausland, Skinker, from Canterbury, which is Francis Slay Park, north all the way up to Page. It's about 4.6 miles, $12.2 million project. And we're asking for 2.44 million to cover design, right-of-way, and construction. And also, we just submitted this, and East West Gateway, we anticipate will allocate funding in May, and then we can start design once that funding is fully approved later in the year. But it is very similar. Here we've got 21 signals to improve. We do have a little bit unique situation up by Enright to Page. It's where the railroad underpass is. Right now, that's 6 lanes of traffic, which are unnecessary. We're proposing to provide a new pedestrian pathway, reduce lanes to 2 in each direction. You kind of see a little bit of that in the lower right-hand corner, building some medians, wider pedestrian paths, where right now the lights, the Culver style lights, are right in the middle of the pedestrian path, and it's not compliant with ADA. So that is a combination pedestrian, mostly signal, traffic signal improvement. And this is our small bridge off system. It's on a local road in Forest Park by the Muni. This is the old stable bridge on Theater Drive over one of the lagoons. It's a good picture of it in the lower left. It's over 100 years old. It's structurally deficient and eligible for off-system bridge funding. It's 3.8 million with about a $760,000 request. This also was submitted in February. All right. I know we've got David on the line here, Newberger of the Office of the Disabled. And I'll go ahead and just touch on a few brief items. And then, David, I don't know if you were planning to speak or if you wanted to address this or what your preference is.
I'd be happy to talk for a minute or two.
Okay, well, I'll just hit a couple points real quick and then turn it over to you to talk about what we're requesting. But as
Okay.
many of you know, we adopted the transition plan on February 6th last year. So it's essentially, it's been a year in the works. It provides, we've been successful the last 2 years getting capital to fund $2 million over each of those years. And we've done a lot with them, and David will talk more about it, but we've used those funds to improve accessibility in the right of way, a lot of city buildings, a little bit in parks. And we want to continue that funding revenue stream to move forward with additional transition plan improvements. At that, David, why don't you go ahead and embellish a little bit more if you would.
Sure. First of all, the reason that we have a transition plan is because the ADA requires one. We're obligated to assess the barriers to access throughout the city of city property, not necessarily private enterprise. But then we're obligated to make things sufficiently accessible so that everybody can enjoy the value of being citizens and living in the city. We have only asked, and I've listened to all these numbers that John was going through in the several millions of dollars all the time. And some ways I may be a piker, but the essential point is that the obligation on the city is a city law. I mean, a federal law requiring the city to do something. And the federal government will not pay for your coming into compliance. So this system requires that we come into compliance by using general revenue. We don't have any other grant sources that we can raise to use this money. There are a lot of barriers to access, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with around the city. And it's a big project. So that to get all of this done is years, as far as I see it. We started, as John said, with $2 million. And then now we're in a second period of $2 million. Because of inflation, we've raised it a little bit. I'd like to raise it more than that. But we do a series of projects. In the first year, I just have a list of some things that we did in general terms. But we, for example, and I'm just going to run through the list. I hope that it won't take that long. Improve sidewalks around 5 of the city senior centers. Improved fixed the entrance to the Gamble Recreation Center. Provided the first accessible men's restrooms in City Hall and put up wayfinding in City Hall. Rebuilt the sidewalks around Soldan to make them accessible and across the street to their athletic field. Provided automatic door openers at Soulard Market. Provided access to Frontenac Park fishing platform and O'Halloran Park Lake. Provided an accessible route to get into the fire department headquarters, and finally a long run of sidewalk on Louisiana on the east side, which was broken up from Gravelway to Maribel. And this current year, we're still building everything that's going to be done, but we anticipate again spending a like amount of money. I don't feel very threatened by the Justice Department because they know the city government has worked very hard on accessibility. But the point is that if you have a transition plan, which you have to have, and you don't make it active, then you're opening yourself up to the feds coming in and saying, do much more than you plan to do in any given year. So we just try to keep going at a steady pace, even though the city does not have a lot of money. But it gives us the opportunity to have anyone start. They say, "What are you doing?" I'm open for questions or whatever.
Hey, David, I have a quick one. How do you get your requests, or how do you identify which projects to work on?
First of all, we welcome any citizen giving us suggestions. We make it a very high priority. People talking to us about that. For example, some blind people have pressed the issue of having accessible pedestrian signals, and which are the signals that talk to you. They say, wait, cross market, that kind of thing. And we hope to install those in several intersections this year with this year's money, among other things. But certainly, people's complaints. What I tell people is that the citizens of St. Louis don't complain very much, and they should. They're just go along, and lay back. But when we hear things from a citizen, we respond as promptly and quickly as we can. And then we look at other things. We have a lot of data in the transition plan about areas that we've surveyed and assessed. I have an organization called the Universal Design Group, which is about a group of about 25 citizens with disabilities who talk about various projects, and they can be a source of suggestions. I ask organizations like Paraquad to put out the word to invite their constituency to send something in and talk to us. And generally, you look around the city. In the end, there are some sidewalks we've been talking about. For example, this year, it hasn't been finalized, but this year we're looking at sidewalks along Gravois and sidewalks along St. Louis Avenue. St. Louis Avenue is in particularly bad shape, so it's likely that we're going to do a relatively long run on both of those sidewalks. We just try to exercise good judgment knowing our city.
Great. I thank you. I see Kay Parrish, you have your hand up. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, my question is just like, with all of these numbers in terms of the estimates, like how solid are the numbers? Do we have like multiple people bidding on them, or how exactly are we coming up with these estimates of the cost of these things?
So I'm gonna take that one, John, and you can build on to it. It's okay. In the engineering world, an engineer's estimate is what a design engineer puts together before the project. So you go through, you look at the plans, you develop a cost estimate, but at this level here, it's very, very conceptual. And you don't bid anything in government work until you're ready to do it, because if a contractor were to give you an estimated cost for something, they are no longer available to bid the project. So they disqualify themselves. So this is all a function of engineering, professional engineers, estimators, and all the people who work on my staff who estimate costs on every project that we do every day. I would say they're conceptual, and generally they're relatively close. There are always unforeseens that can happen as part of the project, but this is the project in the world that we live in and how we apply for grants. It's acceptable to, the Federal Highway Department. It's acceptable to MoDOT, and it's acceptable to East West Gateway, our MPO, and it is a standard of the industry. So John, do you want to build on that?
Sure. As part of the competitive application, it is a requirement that we submit a cost estimate, and it's fairly broken down into multi-pages, many line entries of what we believe are components of the project. So there is a fair level of engineering and planning that goes into the applications that we have to have a real good idea of what we want to do, because whatever we don't have identified and you try to get federal monies for it later, you've missed the opportunity. So we do build a little contingency in the estimate in the neighborhood of 10 to 20%, but we do also spend a lot of time looking at past bids, recent bids, and what we want to do and itemize those quantities to the best of our ability at the time of the application submittal.
Thank you.
I did have one more program to talk about, and then we could jump back, or unless we want to wrap up the ADA, Paul. I don't know how you feel.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, we'll take other questions, just go ahead and take your other projects and we can wrap
Okay.
up.
Great. I just have this one last one, and it's a funding request of 1.2 million. And this number was derived from past Bike St. Louis numbers that we use to build out our bicycle network in the city of St. Louis. As many of you know, over time, we've got about 140 plus miles of various bike markings and infrastructure on the city streets right now. It ranges from a share the road marking to standard bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, protected parking protected lanes. I show some pictures of green markings that we've done on some major projects, but we haven't done a whole lot for maintenance over time. And what's happening is those markings are fading. We're losing a lot of the protective and the guidance for both motor vehicles that are traveling next to these facilities. You want to have delineators that are in place, markings that clearly show where a bike lane might be. And that is what this funding is attempting to do, address a lot of that items to not only provide new markings, but also to look at potential for upgrading to a higher level facility. So I've listed some of the things here. We might replace some of the markings with high visibility that cost a little bit more, but they last longer with thermoplastic type material. We've got a lot of elevated cycle tracks coming online in the next 2-3 years as well that will also need funding as they get developed and need to maintain over time. But we need to address a lot of that's out there right now. We are a silver level bicycle friendly community as designated by the League of American Bicyclists. We have opportunity to submit an application every 4 years. We have to reapply or you potentially lose that designation. We are hopeful that we can achieve gold level status when it's due next year. And part of that will be this funding that can refresh and show the St. Louis citizens and the league that we are investing in the upkeep of our bicycle facilities. And that's what we believe this funding will address about half of what's on the street right now. And then regarding the application, with all these cycle tracks coming on board and other initiatives that we do feel that we'll have a strong case for achieving that gold level bicycle friendly community status. And with that, that's all I had to present, but I'm going to leave my slides up if we have specific questions or refer back to any projects in particular.
So John, before you take questions, I want to first of all say thank you for making the presentation tonight. Definitely appreciate that. And thank you, David, for your insights as well on EDA. We worked a long time to accomplish that transition plan. I think it's been 3 different administrations now before we actually got that accomplished. So that's been monumental in my mind. I want to remind the Citizen Advisory Committee on your capital needs inventory, as I mentioned during the first week, on the streets and bridge projects, the projects that are highlighted in green, those are in reference to recommendations made by the Complete Streets Committee. And the Complete Streets Committee was recently established in August of 24 by ordinance 71882. And the Complete Streets Committee is tasked with, various transportation and mobility related responsibilities per this ordinance. And one of the tasks is to recommend projects to the city's capital committee. So again, when you look at the needs inventory, the projects John just covered, you'll notice that many of those are in green. They're highlighted in green lettering. That means the Complete Streets Committee has recommended those projects to the capital committee. So please keep that in the back of your mind. And that's all I have at the moment, John.
Oh, okay, thanks, guys. I do see a couple hands raised, so let's go to John Mullet.
Yeah, thanks. On a few of the slides, particularly the ones involving street upgrades, they would mention something like federal funding, and then what I assumed was the organization that funding was specifically coming from, and then an amount that was being asked for. Is the federal funding on those slides, is that money that has already been allocated, or is that what has been like a grant applied for, or how confident are we that we're actually going to get that money, especially with everything going on in the federal government right now? And then on the ones that say local match needed, what happens to the allocated money if a match is not met? Thanks.
So I'm going to start that question off, and then John can maybe answer more. On your capital needs inventory that you have, if you look in the far column to the right that says recommended.
Hey, Rich, and John, I'm going to interrupt, sorry, but I'm going to pull up the inventory right now, and I'll cede back the screen to you, John. But I just want to be able to, so for people to share, be able to see what you're talking about. So let me, I'm going to share that quickly, and so you can see it.
That's a good point. So go to page 2 of 19. So if you look in the far column for Cass Avenue, for example, you will see that there are different things that have happened there. That particular project, we still need the remaining 1.2 million. The rest of it has all been in place. If you drop down to number 5, River to Pear Boulevard improvements, you can see that the design is funded. There is a grant in place. It says STPS, so the grant is already in place. If you go to page number 4 of 19, this one will give you some other examples. So number 21, for example, the design is funded and we have a CMAQ grant in the right column. The one below that, number 22, the design is funded. We have a CMAQ grant already. The next one, number 23, we have applied for a CMAQ grant. Number 24, we've applied for a TAP grant. And I believe there's another one on the bridges on page 5, applied for a TAP grant for Old Stable Bridge. So the grants that we have, generally what happens is we need to come up with the balance and the funding for the ones we have already. All right. For the ones that we have applied for, if you remember back to the first week when I presented on these are the total local match share for the design, the right-of-way, and the construction cost. So if we were to receive the grant, which we don't know yet, and we could simply fund a portion of that number for the design this year. And John didn't get into all those details because it gets a little bit overwhelming. But if the funding wasn't there on the ones we're now applying for, we could certainly break out the design portion of those, which is much less than the total local match share. We could fund that design this year fiscal year. And then we could fund the right of way or the construction in either next year or the following year, depending on what the schedule is for the plans to be completed. So, John, I'm going to let you maybe add on to those comments.
Great job, Rich, summarizing where we stand right now. So essentially, there were 4 projects that were submitted on February 7th of this year. And you see the 3 of them, or you see the traffic management phase 9. That is one that come May, East-West Gateway reveals their recommendation. And then it's a multi-step process where various committees, including the Transportation Planning Committee, and then eventually the Executive Advisory Committee and the Board of Directors makes the final approval in August of 2025. But come May, it's when we'll have a strong idea. And based on my experience, every one of these 4 projects have a very high likelihood of getting the funding recommendation. We talked about the CAS being the guaranteed one project for STPS. And going back down to the traffic management phase 9, that category, funding category, there is generally more funding available for the region, and it's much less competitive. We feel very strongly about receiving the money for that one, since it's our only one also in that category. The transportation alternative on Christie, that is our only project we're submitting. Relatively, it is near the high end of the ask for that funding category, but because it has such strong connectivity into the GRG project, it ties into the investment at the new signal at Kings Highway. We feel very strongly with that one. And then the Old Stable Bridge, that's an all-system bridge, and there's historically very little competition on that funding. So we feel very good about the 4 that were submitted in February and anticipate receiving funding for all of those.
Thank you, John and Rich. And John, that was a great question because I was thinking those along those same lines. So of the ones that we've got identified, CAS has fully been awarded and we just need to come up with the match. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, no, that one on CAS, let me go up to CAS. So we submitted on February 7th a large STPS grant for CAS. We are relying on that 12.7 million. Let me go back to that one. That ask is 12.7 million federal, but because we have already been banking some local match, knowing this was coming, the amount we need to cover all the matches is an additional 1.2. Right. This committee provided 3.8 last year. We're asking for 1.2 to help support that application we just submitted.
And that Paul, is a construction grant
right?
For that project. That's a STPS construction grant.
And then we'll be done with that. Should we fund that, then we're done.
That's correct.
So I was trying to establish the hierarchy of funding. So here, that's pretty much complete. We've got those awards. Now, where you see design has been awarded, is it when you get a grant for design? I assume it's likely that you're going to get the construction to follow, or is that a safe assumption, or have you ever heard it told before?
So all those, other than CAS, that's a unique project in that we design that independently of a grant source for various reasons. All these other projects on here, it's one application that involves multiple phases: design, right-of-way, and construction.
Oh, yeah, but what I was trying to get at was that on some of them, it's already been awarded. Design has been awarded, and others we've just applied. So I'm trying to establish the hierarchy. We were, given that we got a limited pot of monies, when we start on the hierarchy saying, what would we fund first? Okay, CAS, and then those design has already been funded,
Gotcha.
right?
So,
Okay,
so on the ones that the capital committee has already given money for design, those are fully funded for the federal monies. That's one application that covers federal money for design, right of way, and construction. But the shortfall falls, we haven't yet identified local match for right of way and construction. We did for design, but we still need the local match to cover the grant that we already have that we received a year ago.
right.
We need local match for right of way and
But to
construction.
Paul's point, John, you're right, Paul. The ones that we have grants on that we're doing design on now would be the ones we need to get construction funding for next. And the
Right.
other ones that we've applied for theoretically, assuming we get those, which we should, then we could look at the design portion of those total local match shares there. And that could be funded either through a capital ask, it could be funded through a gas tax ask. I mean, there are other, because that is a much smaller amount, or it could be funded through the roads and bridges discretionary. So yes, you are correct. The hierarchy is the ones we have design and grants for right now.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood there's sort of that sort of hierarchy there in terms of when it comes to funding. All right, before I interrupt, Leroy, you had your hand raised earlier. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, I do. John, a number of your projects talked about traffic monitoring cameras. Are those tied into the police department's real-time crime center, or is someone else looking at those, or someone else monitoring those cameras?
So that requires special cameras, and they're not eligible for federal funding. So this project is not directly tied into the real crime center, but all the equipment's there, all the technology and wiring is there so that they could be supplemented and funded entirely by the city to do just that. But the federal grant doesn't provide funding for that.
Okay, thank you.
And I see, let's see, we got chat. This is Katie. Katie's asking the question, is there any overlap between these projects and projects prioritized for RAM settlement funding? Yeah, I'm not.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, they were talking about for the Rams funding, they were talking about water projects and things along those lines. I've not heard any of these projects being talked about in the Rams funding conversation, but that is definitely a good question.
Okay. Okay, great. All right.
I don't know, Paul, if any of the versions of the RAM settlement address bike ped infrastructure, which they very well may. I haven't read the latest iterations.
Right. And that funding source is still in flux, so we just have to plan like we were planning. Nancy, were you on? I thought I saw something that said Nancy Cross is on, but not. Okay. So is that what you have tonight for us, John and Rich?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is Streets and Bridges and ADA. Are there any other questions for our presenters this evening? I don't see any. All right, very good. So this was an unusual meeting that we had it on Tuesday. We tried to keep them on Thursdays. So our next meeting will be next week, a week from Thursday. We're going back to our Thursday meetings. And at that meeting, we'll be presenting, we're going through the inventory where we'll be discussing the city's rolling stock fleet, and hopefully we get some more information on some of the building projects that we need to address as well, so we can sort of round out the total inventory, so we can get you a more detailed briefing on that part of those capital needs. So unless we have anything else to go over this evening, it looks like we're going to be finishing right about an hour here. So thank you, and keep safe out there, and we'll see you next Thursday at 5:30.